All right, this is an excerpt from the Joint House Inquiry into 9/11, and it's additional questions from a number of the panelists. And the interview is for FBI Director Louis Freeh, New York lawyer Mary Jo White, and Paul Pillar.
I just have one question. You've been very patient with all of us, and I appreciate that, and I know all the members do. I asked Director Tenet this question, and I ask it of you because of your long and many years experience in dealing with issues of terrorism. And what was your reaction, not your emotional reaction, because I know, Judge Freeh, you mentioned the victims in your, right in the beginning of your testimony. So I don't want, I'm sure we know what your emotional reaction was. But on September 11th, what was your reaction when you discovered that 4 planes had been commandeered and 3,000 Americans had been killed, 4 planes simultaneously? And I'm asking that in the sense of, were you surprised, or and I don't want you to, I'm trying to determine if, you know, this idea that this could happen was a surprise to you like it was to every member of Congress and every American, or was this idea, I mean, you've talked about the fact that you knew America was going to be attacked again, and we know it's going to be attacked again. But I'm wondering what your reaction was when you saw the pictures on the television screen and thought about what happened.
Well, I was actually there, so I actually saw more than on the television screen, and my reaction was, like all of America, horror, and the manner in which the attack occurred and the massiveness of it came as a surprise to me, too. Not that there was an attack, not that there was a massive attack, but as massive as it was and in the way that it was. What's the phrase everyone uses now, which I think is apt for my reaction? You know, is it a failure of imagination? I mean, maybe it is, but I was surprised at the attack, the type of attack.
Yeah, I mean, I would say the same thing. The scope of the attack, but not the fact of the attack, you know, was shocking. We were all, I think, towards the end of 1999, literally the last days and minutes, we were all in our respective command posts around the country. You probably remember this was the millennium where we weren't only worried about the computers turning over, but we were worried about a major attack by either an al-Qaeda type group or some other organization, either in the United States or somewhere around the world. An attack that would have happened at that time would have not surprised anybody. There wouldn't have been any shock with respect to the fact that we were attacked. And again, this is coming down the road from the World Trade Tower, from Kobar, from the East African embassy bombings. So to answer the question, the scope of it and the success of it, I mean, the horrific success of it, but not the attack itself, was a shock.
With regard to any particular technique, by definition, it's a surprise, because if it could have been foreseen tactically, it would have been headed off. But as to an attack aimed against the U.S. homeland to cause mass casualties, truly mass casualties, and by this particular group or people of their ilk, in that sense, it's not a surprise.
Now, that's probably the right answer, right? Because at this point, it's hard to imagine a multi-plane attack multiple hijacking attack where the pilots didn't return to the airport and demand, you know, hostage negotiations, what they're used to. They're not used to anything like this because this is from an enemy that doesn't care about hostage negotiations. We're well beyond that now. So I think their reactions are justifiably sound. With Louis Freeh, it basically will come down to the 1993 World Trade Center attacks, where the object wasn't a plane, it was a bomb. And what the FBI is used to is, airplane hijackings by members of Hezbollah, where, they're talking about the release of uh, former members or current members or a change in foreign policy. Well, that's not the case here. Bin Laden didn't care about uh, changing foreign policy or changing foreign policy with the exchange of something in return. He was going to make it happen, or he was going to precipitate a reaction from an imperialist nation like the United States, in which it did. That's what they wanted to do in 1998 with the attack of the East Africa bombings. They were hoping for Clinton to overextend his hand and go into Afghanistan and attack Al Qaeda and the Taliban there. And he didn't take the invitation. And so bin Laden took the invitation to the country. So he did the attacks inside the United States. That was the evolution of terrorism.
Should we worry that it'll happen again?
Yes, sir.
Judge Freeh?
Absolutely.
Ms. White?
No, yes, we should worry about it.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Robert.
We talked a little bit about.
Well, I wonder what their excuse or their answer was regarding, say, the Bajinka plot, right? So after the Bajinka plot was exposed and was compromised, Khalid Sheikh Mohammed and Abdul Hakim Murad were talking about how to attack the United States using airplanes as the weapon itself and not putting bombs on the planes, because that's what they would be looking for. Well, after 9/11, I mean, every intelligence service in the world would be looking at people entering the plane more strictly and more attentive. So a repeat attack, maybe not. I don't know. I wouldn't. I would say that they would try another avenue. I wouldn't say they would do the repeat itself.
How we try to anticipate what happens next, and following up on Mr. LaHood's question, how do we try to prepare our country and our intelligence services and our law enforcement and our local responders to what might happen next in this country? I guess in reading a book that was written about Pearl Harbor by Roberta Wohlstetter, she has a preface in it written by Thomas Schelling. And he says in his preface to Pearl Harbor, he says, this was a national failure to anticipate the enemy's next move. Many people in the press have speculated that they're smoking guns or, old adages that we apply. How would you respond to that, Judge Freeh, that this was a national failure to anticipate the enemy's next move when we were at war?
Well, I think, this committee's work and any commission to follow is going to have to give us a lot more facts and perspective to make that kind of a conclusion. The word failure, in the technical sense, implies that there was or should have been an ability to avoid the failure. And I don't think we have enough facts. I certainly don't, as really a private citizen reading newspapers, to give you an opinion on that. With respect to what we do here in out, I think it's going to be a function of intelligence. It's going to be a function of interdiction, going over to where we have to go over, whatever sanctuaries, as Ms. Hill mentioned, and do what has to be done there to destroy command and control capability and also to exploit intelligence. It means infiltration. If one of those 19 hijackers had spoken, maybe they did, maybe we don't know about it yet, uncautiously or imprudently to someone in some place where that information could have been captured, we could have had a day of terror prevented instead of September 11th. There's all kinds of possibilities there. So infiltration. We need to have our agents sitting around wherever they were sitting around in Hamburg and the UAE and other places, as well as in the caves over in Afghanistan, so we can know what's going on.
That's not necessarily the case. I mean, it came out in the Joint House inquiry that uh, Khalid al-Mihdhar and Nawaf al-Hazmi were coming to the United States, and that was known to the CIA, and they just didn't share with the FBI. Well, that's not the FBI's fault, but I mean, the intelligence was there, and who knows what they were talking about on the phone, Bin Laden's satellite phone, or the house in Yemen, in which the NSA had already tapped. And I would be remiss if they didn't, talk about the operation itself a year prior or 2 years prior to the event that's happening. So that would mean there was foreknowledge, and they allowed the attacks to even happen if we're going to go that route. And it's a plausible scenario. But you don't need to have informants inside Al Qaeda or inside the camps to know exactly, the general details of the planes operation. I mean, Nawaf Al Hazmi, who had a job at a gas station in San Diego at Sam's Star Mart, which was owned by Stan Musafa. And he actually, according to the employees there, he was talking about the operation a year prior to the event. And the FBI investigated this issue. The San Diego FBI field office did anyway. So there's that. So I don't know what the others were talking about when they
All
came
those
later.
factors, I think, working together has to occur. But as you just asked the question, or someone just, Mr. LaHood just asked the question, we shouldn't. This is a hard thing to say, I guess, but we should not give the mistaken impression to people listening to our debate here that, there's a secret formula for preventing this. If we could just reorganize Homeland Security, if we could just give a couple of $1 billion to the FBI, if we could just do a little bit better, we're going to prevent these things. That's a fallacy, and it's a misleading impression. If that was possible, we wouldn't see any attacks in Israel with their experience and expertise and skill. So we have to, unfortunately, accept the reality that these attacks from time to time, even on a spectacular and shocking and horrific basis, will succeed. Our job is to reduce that incidence, to make those attacks as unlikely and infrequent as possible. But it's not just a question of rearranging the chairs on the deck.
And as I at least meant to say in my opening statement, that I don't see this as a smoking gun. I don't see a national failure, meaning it could have been prevented. I think mistakes and gaps and failures and disconnects were out there. I'm not sure that this committee is found or will find a smoking gun, but
Well, I mean, God's sakes, former senior executive Thomas Drake basically said that the NSA had so much metadata on the operators of the planes operation that they could have stopped 9/11 altogether from even happening. And God knows what they were listening to on the two phone taps. I can only imagine. And that's apart from the CIA, who already had an enormous amount of data regarding a number of the hijackers, including Khalid al-Mihdhar, Nawaf al-Hazmi. And, who knows what the Saudis and Israelis knew while they were operating apart from each other, while they were monitoring members of the planes operation on the west and east coasts. So there's that too. But we'll never know what they know because they're all deported, and we never investigated or opened an investigation into them or even tried to interview them.
we sure need to correct them.
So
Mistakes and gaps and disconnects. Ms. White, what would you say about that?
Well, I certainly think we need to have, zero tolerance is an overused phrase, but we have to have zero tolerance for any instances of failure to communicate, whether it's between the FBI and CIA or whomever. There's no silver bullet. I mean, I think everyone agrees on that. We are more vigilant now. I think everyone has lowered the bar, and I'm talking about the cops on the beat as well as FBI and CIA and everyone else, for what will have us take the next investigative step. I think we have a list of things from all these cases we've done and investigations we've done and the cooperating witnesses. who've been debriefed to sort of their wish list of various, terrorist, attacks. And as apocryphal as they still may look, in terms of the reality, we have to at least assume it could happen and figure out how best to anticipate that. I think we're doing a lot in the way of homeland security, which I think is critical. Where we're most vulnerable, we need to shore ourselves up. I mean, we're way ahead of where we were, but we're still vulnerable.
I would just associate myself with everything Judge Freeh said in response to your question. It's all the things he mentioned and more. And on this question of preparing the American people, I would just underscore what I tried to say in my opening remarks. There is no silver bullet. We should not let the American people think that by this next set of changes or fixes, whatever they may include, somehow we've solved the problem. I think we can learn some lessons from the Israelis in this, whose government have made conscious efforts to psychologically prepare their people for dealing with terrorism, not accepting it, but dealing with it in a way that tries to minimize the psychological impact that's an inherent part of what the terrorists are trying to do.
Thank you.
Roberts.
Well, I mean, let's look at it this way. I mean, 1993 World Trade Center bombing didn't even have to happen because they already had an insider named Imad Salem, who's infiltrated the Al Farouk Mosque members in Brooklyn, New York, and basically was tasked to build the bomb in the World Trade Center. And he probably could have gotten away with it, but basically he told them that he knew how to build a bomb and he didn't. And they pulled him off because he didn't want to wear a wire. What they should have done was basically allowed him not to wear a wire, but to keep infiltrating the group and finding out what the targets were going to be bombed. Now, he didn't know what target was going to be bombed because that was only known to Omar Abdel Rahman. And originally it was going to be Jewish neighborhoods in Brooklyn, New York, and the Jacob Javits FBI building and the George Washington bridges. And that came later in the landmarks plot. But initially that was going to be the plan. And they were going to build multiple bombs. But then Imad Salem got pulled by the FBI because Carson Dunbar, who's the lead special agent in the New York division, he basically saw that Imad Salem and his handler, Nancy Floyd, who was in charge of Imad Salem's operation, and they saw that they were basically, I don't know, I don't want to say it was intentional, but he basically pulled them off because he was jealous of the operation itself, and that he basically had a better relationship with Nancy Floyd than he did with Carson Dunbar. And what happened was Imad Salem got pulled. They called Pakistan. They put in a bomb maker. His name was Ramzi Youssef. He built the bomb, but only him and Omar Abdel Rahman knew about the target, which was the World Trade Center. Nobody else knew about it. And until the day of the target itself, even the people who helped build the bomb, people like Mahmoud Abalima, Mohammed Salameh, Iyad Ismail, and a number of others, they didn't know until like a couple of days prior to the attack, and they delivered the bomb to the basement of the World Trade Center. So that attack wouldn't have happened if they just allowed Imad Salem to operate freely as he was able to. And he was getting cheap pay too. I think he was only getting like $500, but after the World Trade Center, he received $1 million.
Thank you,
That attack didn't even have to happen.
Mr. Chairman. Dr. Pilar, I am intrigued by your statement on page 3 when you said, what is the lesson to be drawn from this episode, apart from the direct one that the intelligence community and the FBI were working closely with the relevant regulatory agency as early as the mid-1990s to call attention to the foreign terrorist threat to domestic civil aviation? I think it has to do with how much our national willingness to respond with things like expensive new security measures depends on the reality of past tragedies more than projections of threats that have not materialized. Here's the key. The intelligence community has a duty here. As any new intelligence analyst is taught, and Kai Fallis can tell you about this, what matters is not just to make the correct predictions and hit the right notes, which may look good in postmortems, but to beat the drum loudly enough about impending threats to some chance of making an impact on policy. Of course, if you beat it too loud, you get the drum around your head. My question to all of you is, what keeps you up at night? What drum would you like to beat if, in fact, you could beat one to change policy, as opposed to what you have been doing within the confines of your jurisdictional responsibility? Start with Ms. White.
Get the walls down and make sure all the information is shared and analyzed real time by excellent expert analysts.
Judge?
Well, I mean, going beyond the scope of my prior responsibilities, I mean, I think to the degree and certainty that we are able to identify a state or state class threat bent on destroying the United States and killing thousands and thousands of Americans.
Sanctuary, in other words.
Exactly. We have to make that decision. That's maybe the hardest decision that a president or a Congress has to make. The circumstances have to be right. It takes enormous initiative and courage. But I think when we find that kind of a threat, we have to go after it and not relegate our response to subpoenas and search warrants.
So if Afghanistan was the sanctuary for al-Qaeda, had we denied that sanctuary, we would have been miles ahead, and hopefully something could have been done.
Miles ahead, and hopefully we could have avoided some of the horror.
Paul, you're the drum beater. Pardon me for calling you Paul, Dr. Paul.
That's all right. What keeps me up at night, Senator, are not just the current group we're going after, al-Qaeda, but what comes after that and what comes after that. And I am optimistic. Terrorist groups, including fragments of and successors to al-Qaeda, even after we've reached a point where we could say we've beaten al-Qaeda as an organization.
So we're at war with radical groups in the Islam world. Samuel P. Huntington.
I prefer not to use the term war with anyone in the Islamic world because of the connotations that has for many people who hear that phrase.
I said radical groups within the Islamic world.
Certainly with the radical groups.
Radical groups.
But again, we should not make the mistake that we have our sights on one group or one state, and once we've eliminated that, we've gotten...
Now, one answer about we want to change policy. Well, how about foreign policy? This is the reason why they were attacking us in the first place, not because we have the freedom to dress the way we are or the freedom to drink at a certain hour. Those are religious indifferences, and they don't matter to people like al-Qaeda or bin Laden. They are attacking us because of our foreign policy, plain and simple. And I don't know how many times I have to repeat it, and how many times that these terrorists who are being caught and, they admit to their interrogators and to their the investigators, where they basically are telling them that, your foreign policy with Israel is the reason why we're attacking you in the first place. It's disastrous toward Arab hegemony in the region. Now, if you take a look at the current predicament of the Middle East, I'd say that's exactly the glaring issue. You take a look at Saudi Arabia and Israel, they are a detriment to global hegemony in Southeast Asia and in the Middle East. And God's sakes, it's more apparent now than it was pre 9/11. And this is the reason why nobody's talking about it, because that's the elephant in the room. Nobody's going to talk about that. This is the reason why they're attacking us in the first place, because that means that we'll have to change our policy to who? The very people who fund congressmen and women, even to the present day, Israel and Saudi Arabia.
So the Osama
Don't talk about that, right? Talk about anything else.
bin Laden syndrome, and if you get rid of him, you're okay.
I think that's a mistake to say we've gotten rid of him, it's okay. Look at the current situation where it's uncertain whether he's dead or alive. I think most of the analysts who follow the problem would agree that even if his dead body were to turn up tomorrow, we've still got a serious problem with the people who are either in his organization now or, as I say, will be members of fragments or successors to it.
Kai, you were a brave and successful drum beater. Do you have a drum that you would recommend that you could beat on now in terms of making a policy change?
Well, sir, I would just build on what Dr. Pilar said, and that is the concern that I have over how these groups will evolve and change. Beginning in 1998 is when you saw a major evolution in the capabilities of the al-Qaeda network and their ability to target U.S. interests. I believe, and I think the evidence is there, of another actor that helped these people gain this capability, and as their sanctuary has been denied to them in Afghanistan and they seek other places, other leaders under which to coalesce, that the results are potentially very dangerous for the U.S.
So a policy of preemption, no matter how tough it is, and it is very tough with changes in foreign policy, military tactics, and the political situation. That's a road we have to take.
I believe so, sir. I think the static defense is always doomed to failure.
Thank you.
Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I have two areas that I'd like to question in. One is, as I said in my opening statement several hours ago, I was concerned about the fact that we seem to have limited knowledge on some of the strategic issues relative to terrorist agents who are within the United States, including numbers, capabilities, intentions, relationships with headquarters organizations for purposes of command and control, financing, general support. Do you share my concern about our limited knowledge of those issues? Is that an important set of questions? And if it is important, how do we go about increasing our strategic knowledge of who our adversary is?
Well, I mean, I'll start, Mr. Chairman. And I think it is an important and valid concern. I mentioned before that, again, now more as an observer than a knowledgeable insider, the huge increase in cases and identified subjects in the United States, people who fall into the category that you've just articulated a legitimate concern about, cases being opened and techniques and resources being expended that obviously were not being expended before. My belief is that a lot of that information, at least this is what I'm told, and in fact I read it in the papers on Sunday, a lot of that information is from exploited intelligence received overseas by the very military action that we've all talked about today as, in some cases, the only alternative to, what we can do in a passive way to deal with this problem. So I think, that kind of exploitation of intelligence translated into active surveillances and investigations and collection, which leads to detentions, immigration violations, jaywalking, whatever the case may be, to neutralize that threat has to be done. But I think the intelligence has to come from someplace. We can't come up with an invalid profile or a stereotype, and that becomes the focus of what we do. We don't do that in America. We don't do it well, and we don't do it at all. I think it has to be done on the basis of information and intelligence, and you get that inside the country by informants and infiltration. You get it outside the country by exploiting the things that are being exploited, and that's where the focus, I think, needs to be.
As an example, someone has characterized the Al-Qaeda as being almost Germanic in their obsession with record keeping, and thus the large volumes of materials that we're getting, and that among those records we hope we'll have things like rosters of students who attended these training camps, and thus put ourselves in a position to begin to ask the question, are some of these students who were trained in specific skills while they were in Afghanistan, do we have any reason to believe through visa records or immigration records or others that they might be in the United States today? Is it your sense that we are, to use your term, exploiting some of the data that we're now gathering through interrogations and document seizures in Afghanistan and elsewhere?
Yes, it is.
That purpose?
That's exactly what we're doing. And to go back to the other point made here several times, Mr. Pilar most recently, the importance of our overseas liaison and contacts, to the extent that our counterparts, whether they be police officers or security services in dozens and dozens of countries, are willing to impart that information to us, that they trust us enough that they will give us access to that kind of information. That's the basis upon which leads and prevention, translates into homeland security.
Thank you.
One thing about Al Qaeda is they keep meticulous records on people who are in the organization. There's a great file repository about, but it's in Arabic, so it's called the Harmony documents. The one is called the I forgot. Damn, there's two sets of documents that are, but they're primarily in Arabic, and they were recovered in Croatia or in Bosnia or something like that in the year 2001, at an office. And it outlines the early formation of Al Qaeda and who's involved in their records, whether they wanted who they what they were training under. Was it the media affiliate? Was it the Shura affiliate? Was it the military affiliate? There's a different number of different committees within Al Qaeda. So, and it basically has records of everybody that's involved with the organization. So,
Ms. Pelosi.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Following up on the chairman's line of questioning, I want to refer to something in your testimony, Judge Freeh, in that you say the 1996 Khobar bombing investigation demonstrates the FBI's successes and limitations in combating foreign-based terrorists who wage war against the United States. For us at the committee and for all of us involved in intelligence in any way, force protection is our highest priority, and certainly pre and post September 11th, forces overseas and in our own country. It was interesting to me that we had troops in Saudi Arabia. When I read in your testimony, I was surprised to read that it said, because of the FBI's prior contacts with the Saudi police service, the Mabahath, and the Interior Ministry had been carried on from offices in Rome and later Cairo, the FBI lacked any effective liaison or relationship with its counterpart agency in Riyadh. It seems to me that the minute we put troops on the ground, part of that arrangement should be that there would be an FBI presence in the country, and it doesn't have to be highly visible. But this terrible tragedy, which before we got over it, we were into the East Africa, and then before we got over that, we're in the coal, and then of course September 11th. This terrible tragedy, losing our young people in the armed services. You had to come from the United States, send scores of agents there to investigate, to do the forensic work, et cetera, at the scene. Wouldn't you think that it would be, or would you recommend that the minute we put troops on the ground, there's an FBI presence, visible or not, in the country, and that be part of the arrangement?
Yes, I would, but maybe going beyond that and maybe more significantly, those are relationships that have to be grown over a period of time. When the bombing took place at Tehran, the liaison between the FBI and the Saudi police was out of Rome. Every 2 years the agent would come by and talk to somebody, and that was it. There was no high-level counterpart interaction. We didn't know who to call, and they didn't know who to call to the extent that they wanted to work with us.
Well, I mean, I find that appalling that we have troops on the ground. They're a target. We can imagine that they would be a target, and yet we don't have, we have somebody in Rome who stops by every now and then.
I couldn't agree with you more, but just to finish my sentence, the notion is getting those people on the ground before the troops are there.
Of course.
the question is, why are we there anyway? Right? That's the problem. Again, they're overstepping the problem. The problem is the presence of Americans in Mecca and Medina. That's the reason why Osama bin Laden created the first fatwa. The first fatwa was in February of '96, and it basically told of attacks against American installations in Mecca and Medina. Okay, it wasn't upgraded until civilians until 1998, and that was the East Africa bombings.
But I also you go on to talk about the cooperation the FBI received as a result of Prince Bandar and Nayev's personal intervention and the support of unprecedented and valuable. From time to time, a road back or legal obstacle would occur, which was expected, given our differences. Despite these challenges, the problems were always solved by the personal intervention of Prince Bandar and his consistent support for the FBI. But I would certainly hope that, while we cannot get there before the troops get there where they are now, that we would move quickly to make sure we have a presence, the liaison relationships established in any of these countries, and certainly before we send troops to any new country for any duration, and a presence that we would do that. Judge White mentioned in her comments, just in passing, she said the value of the cooperation that we have. We hold on to the coalition that we have in the fight against the war on terrorism, so that we can share information and how valuable that is. And it seems to me that it would be more valuable the stronger the presence. Judge White, would you like to speak to that?
No, absolutely. The single most important thing, I guess there are several single most important things we've talked about, but I think in the war on terrorism, our ability to combat it, protect ourselves, is holding on to this world coalition and expanding it. Because if you have a hole in it, that's where the next plot's going to come from. That's where the next sanctuary is going to be. And to the extent, Director Freeh just did an amazing job at globalizing the FBI, which is making possible that coalition now, in my view. I mean, it's not, we don't have everybody in it, and we need to get everybody in it, and the FBI doing the groundwork for that everywhere, I think, is critical.
I thank you. And Judge Freeh, I was not saying that you should have had this done. I think this is something at the State Department, at the National Security Council level, that has to be part of the package before we put our, or as we put our troops on the ground, or as you said, before we do. So, you know, I commend you for your work, but I think that there needs to be some higher level, well, we all look to a higher level in terms of the federal government, to the executive branch, making sure that this happens before we go in.
Yes,
Thank you
no, I
all.
agree.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Senator Shelby.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I want to go back to basically analytical center, you know, where a fusion center or whatever you want to talk about. Judge Freeh, you talk about, and I'm reading an excerpt again from your remarks, and I'll quote you, and you correct me if I'm wrong here in the quote, or if the quote's wrong. You say it's very important in hindsight to segregate this relevant information and put it into a dedicated timeline. I agree with that, as we do in a postmortem. But isn't it very important to put all this information together, relevant information, fusion center, to try to predict something? In other words, try to discern something that's going to happen just as well.
Absolutely. I mean, prevention is what the priority is and has to be in this area, and the prevention is only as good as the success of that fusion and its predictability.
And if we don't put together.
Yeah, this is a great question, right? So, all right, we put things in a timeline to try and to predict an outcome of the future, right? In regards to intelligence, right? We have reports from the World Trade Center, for example, 1993 World Trade Center bombing, where Ramzi Youssef basically told his investigators as he's being flown to the Southern District of New York to be tried for the bombings, where he basically was told all the towers are still standing, and he basically told them if I had enough money, they wouldn't be. And basically, the threats at the World Trade Center didn't stop in 1993; it kept going. And you know, the World Trade Center itself was a target even before 1993. I mean, right there, the World Trade Center, right there, the World Trade Center should have had much more stricter security measures. I know they hired Rick Rescorla for security at Dean Witter, and that they had Securicom come in and put video cameras, but it wasn't enough. I think there should have been a heightened awareness about the World Trade Center itself. And even Rick Rescorla basically brought in his friend, Ed, I forgot his last name, Ed something, damn it, I forgot his name, but it was his friend from the Vietnam War. And he was a reformed Muslim, and he worked in counterterrorism. And so he asked Ed about the next attack, whether it would be, and he says that Well, they tried from the ground. Now they'll try from the top. And this was actually years before 9/11. So, the thing was Rescorla went back to Dean Winter and said, is it possible that we can actually move our officers out of the World Trade Center into a low high-rise building away near the bridges? Because what he feared was that there was an attack in the World Trade Center and you wouldn't be able to get out of the city because they would close the bridges and the bridges would be under attack as well. So Rick Rescorla was a keen mind, by the way. So, I mean, you had this intelligence come in regarding multiple investigations, one involving Randy Glass, where he was a weapons dealer for the FBI. He was an informant, and he basically was in contact with a Pakistani named R.A. Abbas, where they were talking about selling weapons. And one day they had a dinner at the World Trade Center, and R.A. Abbas told Randy Glass, one day these towers are not going to come down. One day these towers are going to come down. So the intelligence was there that the World Trade Center was a target for terrorism, and nothing was ever taken with any sincerity of it.
That is,
Who do you blame? Right? Well, do you
all
blame
of us
the intelligence
collectively,
service?
the Congress administration, and put the resources that we keep talking about together for some type of a fusion center. We'll pay again, will we not?
I agree, 100%.
Ms. White?
I definitely agree.
Dr. Pilar?
Yes, sir.
Yes, sir.
Judge Freeh, I believe you said today that the FBI, you're speaking of the Bureau, was intensely focused on an attack within the U.S. Dale Watson, who's just retired from the FBI and was head of the FBI's counterterrorism program under you and under Director Mueller, told the staff he was, quote, 98% sure the attack would be overseas. He's head of the FBI's counterterrorism center. And this was based upon the summer of 2001 increase in the chattering threat warnings that were put over here. Is your view basically inconsistent with Mr. Watson, who was head of your counterterrorism center?
Well,
okay.
I'm sorry.
No, go ahead. Now,
I don't think it's inconsistent. Now, I'm not privy to the summer information.
sure, you had left. I have to
Yes. What I will tell you is when I did leave, which was in June.
When you left, you meant you retired, right?
I'm sorry, when I retired,
Sure.
yes.
And left.
You know, I was, as I said, working and conscious of that line of events and activities going
Sure.
back to the Lower Manhattan attack on the Trade Tower in February of 1993. Rassam confirmed that we were being targeted within the United States, and it was a miss that we were lucky to have avoided, but the intent was still to attack us in the United States. The fact that he was expecting by the end of the summer an attack overseas, I don't think is inconsistent with the fact that we were also intensely focused on the targeting of targets within the United States. I don't think that's inconsistent. And I don't know what information he had at the end of the summer, which I don't have.
It's my understanding that, and this is coming from a December 2000 report, that the FBI and the FAA published. It was a classified assessment, and I'm not going to read from that suggested concern about the threat to domestic aviation, you know, but basically saying that the FBI investigations or judgments confirm domestic and international terrorist groups operating in the U.S., but do not suggest evidence of plans to target domestic civil aviation. In other words, the FAA was basically told us that at no time did the FBI or the CIA tell them or warn them about the possibility of airplanes being used as weapons in this terrorist war.
Well, let's go back to 96. Again, Bajinka plot. That investigation was headed by the Philippines, National Police, It was handed over from the lead investigator, Rodolfo Mendoza, to the FBI. And Louis Freeh was the director then. What did they do with it? Nothing. Okay, nothing. They didn't do anything with it. Did they heighten security awareness at the FAA? No. Did they heighten awareness with the Immigration Naturalization Services? No. Right? Sleeper cells inside the United States. That's what Abdul Hakim Arad, who was involved with the Pachinko plot, basically told the interrogators that there was going to be a second part of the plot where they would hijack a number of airliners and crash them into high value targets. There was a number of targets, over 10.
Well, I'm not
The FBI was aware of this. And he,
privy to that report.
Yes.
I'm
Shelby's
also not
talking
trying
about
to
a
avoid
recent
your
report.
question. I'm not aware of any dissemination made while I was in the FBI to the FAA that airplanes would be used or could be used as suicide weapons.
Either he's lying or he's just conveniently forgetting the Pachinko plot operation, where it outlines that the plane was going to be used as a weapon.
As they were. I am aware, not just from the Gore Commission, but just from being alive, that airplanes and hijackings of airplanes have been a premier terrorist target and activity for the last 25 years, and that should come as no shock to anybody.
I can read this. I was just told by staff it is unclassified. We have to be careful what we read up here, and I'll read this from this report just for the record. It says, in December 2000 report, the FBI and the FAA, again, published an assessment that suggested less concern about the threat to domestic aviation. And I'll quote there. FBI investigations confirm domestic and international terrorist groups operating within the U.S., but do not suggest evidence of plans to target domestic civil aviation. Terrorist activity within the U.S. has focused primarily on fundraising, recruiting new members, and disseminating propaganda. While international terrorists have conducted attacks on U.S. soil, these acts represent anomalies in their traditional targeting, which focuses on U.S. interests overseas. Gosh, it was so wrong. We know now. You agree with that?
Well, you know, evidence is a very technical and a very significant word. I don't know what they meant to communicate when they said evidence, as opposed to the threat. Just repeating my last answer, hijacking of aircraft up to and including September of last year was always considered by everybody as a primary target for terrorists, which is why the efforts were taken to fortify airports and profiling and securities. You know, that should come as no surprise.
Should it have come as any surprise that airplanes would be used as weapons to crash into the trade towers, considering that in 1995, the Filipino situation that I know you're familiar with, you know what happened there, and the information was derived. The French scenario where someone was apprehended and they had information they were going to use that plane to crash in, I believe, to the Eiffel Tower.
That's right. Air France 8989.
And other information. Should it have come as a surprise?
Well, no. The answer is no. But again, you've just very expertly distinguished what we call the strategic intelligence from the tactical intelligence. Absolutely. Did the FAA and the industry have that strategic intelligence? They probably did. Did they have the tactical intelligence? Did anybody have the tactical intelligence that aircraft would be used in the manner that was used on September 11th? I think the answer to that is no, and that's why the committee and a commission needs to get into the weeds.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you very much. The final question that I had went to a frustration that I have felt, and I'm sure you have all felt too, in the positions of responsibility that you've had. I don't think, as I look at the panel of very distinguished and experienced people who have been working with this problem on behalf of the United States of America, writing about it, dealing with the intricacies of it and the complexities of it, that
there is any doubt at all, after hearing today, that we understood pretty well what the problem was. And I don't think there's any doubt at all, from my working association with people at the table and the reputations and the accomplishments they've made, that they had excellent ideas on how to take care of weaknesses in the system or problem areas or where resources were short, bring attention to those underinvestments. Now, my question is that we have seen a lot of similar witnesses who have shared in the work product here with us, trying to get to the bottom of all of this and how we do better. How is it, do you think, that all of the expertise and all of the authority that was embodied in articulate, knowledgeable, hardworking people failed to receive the audience that it should have gained, so that we could have focused our resources, our country, our constituents? I guess what I'm asking is, how come nobody was listening? Do you have any idea how we can do better on sounding the trumpet?
Impossible. I mean, I would say that's impossible, only because we had enough people that were listening. We had enough people that were keeping their eyes and ears open and monitoring these operators. But as long as you have agency infighting, as long as you have egos, and as long as you have paychecks, one bigger than the other, you're going to get a myriad and a very difference in how that intelligence is shared, or whether it's going to be shared at all. And then you got another problem, whether certain people have orders not to share intelligence because it'll interfere in an operation in which must be allowed to happen because there's foreign policy that is much more important than American lives. And that's a whole different conversation altogether, because then we're talking about, the essence of good and evil. How do you trust the CIA? And when they have a long sordid history of committing civil disturbances, coups, illegal coups, backing of socialist or nationalists in countries in the Ecuador or in South America, Central America, the drug trade in the Middle East, in the Golden Triangle, and God's sakes, man, how do you trust an agency like that? Handling information as sensitive as international terrorism, which is basically involving U.S. foreign policy. And yeah, I don't know how. This is the agency that's the problem.
When we see,
and not only the agency, but also the foreign policy analysts,
these
foreign and
things
domestic.
happening to us, because I think we've all admitted we were surprised at what happened, how it happened, but we weren't surprised that it happened.
I think that September 11th was that trumpet. And I think, unfortunately and tragically, but perhaps understandably, it took tragedy, horror at that level to grip certainly the public's attention on this. And I think to some extent, look how we've had to change our lives already within this country and around the world. That's not something we do lightly or want to do lightly either, absent an attack at that scale. The East Africa Embassy bombing case, 224 people died. Over in East Africa, we tried the case, in the Southern District of New York in Lower Manhattan. Wrenching testimony, but still, I think within the country, that's over there. And when it was over there, it didn't grip in the same way. So I think it's gripping now. We don't want to, lose sight of the fact that it's a clear present and continuing danger, though. So I think we still have to be trumpeting, but I think September 11th was a loud call.
Well, I hope you're not sentencing us to becoming a reactive society when I think we need to be a visionary society. Perhaps that's one of our lessons. Judge Freeh?
No, I share your frustration, Mr. Chairman, and, I hope September 11th is the trumpet. I just don't know. I mean, did the United States and the same class of wonderful people that you just described, know in 1941 that Japan was capable of attacking the United States? Yes. Was anything done at the time to build up our military? Did the world know by the summer of 1933 that the National Socialists in Germany were going to try to take over the world and murder 6 million Jews? Sure they did. And they sat around at the Evian conference, 32 nations, and couldn't come up with a solution. So, are we doomed to this kind of failure? I hope not. I hope September 11th has sounded that trumpet. But it's going to be up to not just the leadership of the country, but really the people to keep that vision. I think you used the word completely correctly in front of us. And our experience in these things is not good as human beings and as Americans.
Mr. Chairman, the event last September clearly was a trumpet. The question is how quickly and how deeply the blare of that trumpet will fade over time, and I think it's already fading some. We've seen this consistent pattern throughout this period, this last decade that this hearing has been devoted to, of a spike up in interest and concern when we have a major incident, and then the line of concern and interest in this topic goes down. Clearly the spike on September 11th was far greater simply because of the enormity of the act, but it too is already a curve coming down, and the one piece of advice I would give to political leaders like yourself is to try to spread out your action and rhetoric and legislation and everything else so it's not all bunched up right after each attack, but continue to remind the American people, along with the rest of us and in the press and those of us who write books and so on, to get the point across that the things that we need to do in this counterterrorist business cannot all be sandwiched in the first few months after each major attack. It's got to be consistent.
My time has expired, but I do want to pass along a question to each of you. It's a yes or no. That some of my colleagues are passing along to me these days, and it is, do you think we are overreacting to 9/11 as a nation?
No.
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 How can you?
Thank you very much.
Yes.
Chairman Graham.
Could I ask a question which is in the same line of the chairman's questions? Is there anybody in the world who is doing in the intelligence business better than we are that we could learn some lessons from, particularly in this area of what I call the revitalization or the reinvention of agencies as circumstances change and the need to alter behavior in order to respond to the new circumstances. Are there any role models that we should be garnering lessons from?
I can't think of any one role model, Mr. Chairman, but there are a lot of little lessons to be learned with regard to going after particular types of groups. In many cases, we have foreign counterparts that have been on the front line, literally in the sense of their interests and their citizens being the victims of attacks by a particular group. And so they know a lot more about that group and how to go after that group and how to collect against that group than we do. And so you can look at those sorts of group-specific, region-specific lessons, but no, sir, I can't think of any one role model that is the one that we need to emulate on everything. We need to learn lessons from a lot of different partners.
Egypt.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
I want to thank you. Not only do I admire your wisdom, but I admire your stamina. And I really admire anybody who can sit for this many hours. We have the opportunity to get up and walk around. I will close this hearing by saying the committees will meet in closed session.
All right, that's the end anyway. But again, the elephant's in the room, and nobody wants to talk about the why. Why are they attacking us? What's the motivation for these groups? And maybe we'll change how we react to certain countries. And guess what? Those countries that we need to react to and change are the countries that basically are involving themselves intimately in our elections. And that is the Gulf, Saudi Arabia, with the spending of hundreds of millions of dollars, well over billions of dollars now through the over the 55-year relationship with the country itself, and as well as Israel, which has a large committee, the American Israeli Public Affairs Committee, AIPAC, which basically influences and that's a lenient term, influences our left and right circle of politics. And they basically keep names on paper about who is basically favorable to Israeli politics, and basically just Israeli politics. They don't care about American politics. You better acquiesce to our needs and wants. Well, the Gulf is the same way. I mean, Bahrain, United Arab Emirates, Qatar, Saudi Arabia, and these are, these are the oil-rich Salafists who motivate these terrorist groups like Al Qaeda to conduct these terrorist operations. And it's not like how it used to be, where Saudi Arabia used to give blackmail money to these groups so they don't have to attack the kingdom because they're Western backed. And then, the monster bites the hands that feeds them. So, committees like the Joint House Inquiry and 9/11 Commission, they failed on the premise of, why these groups attack us and how they attacked us. And even though that they tried to entertain how, the intelligence services were basically not telling the truth anyway. So there's that.